It begins with a sound you can almost hear, the slow groan of something alive forcing its way upward. Outside a thatched roof cottage, the earth splits. In the moonlight, a green stalk as thick as a mast twists into the air, climbing past the clouds until it vanishes into darkness. Leaves big as a man's chest sway in the wind, dripping with cold dew. Somewhere above, beyond the reach of any ladder, lies a realm no human was meant to see. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments. If you're into this kind of deep dive, tap like and subscribe. Inside that cottage, a boy named Jack, bare feet on the rough plank floor, leans on the windowsill, staring up at the impossible. Hours earlier, his mother's voice had cracked with fury when he traded their only cow for a handful of mottled beans. Worthless, she'd said, thrown into the dirt in disgust. But by morning, those beans had become a ladder to another world. Jack steps out into the dawn chill. The stalk's surface is fibrous, ridged for grip, damp with the night's condensation. He climbs. Every pull upward shrinks the world below, fields and hedges reduced to patterns. The sound of the stream fading into wind. Rooks wheel in black circles around him, their wings slicing the thin air. Breaking through the clouds is like surfacing from deep water. Above is a plain of mist, and beyond it impossibly stone towers with smoke curling from chimneys the size of tree trunks. Jack's feet hit flagstones. The air smells of roasting meat and iron. From the open doors of a hall booms a voice that rattles the floorboards. Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. The giant is huge, his beard singed at the tips from the fire pit in the center of the hall. At his belt, swing iron keys longer than Jack's arm. His wife, if that's what she is, glances nervously at Jack and hides him in the oven's shadow. The giant stomps past, nose twitching. Jack waits until the hall grows quiet. Then he sees them. A hen, whose eggs gleam metallic gold in the firelight. A harp, carved and gilded, that plays without touch, its gut strings humming on their own. Treasures beyond imagining. The thefts happen in breaths one day, the hen, another the harp. Each escape more dangerous than the last. And always the voice in pursuit. Fee-fi-fo-fum. The final time, Jack's feet hit the earth and his hands find the axe. One blow. Two. The stalk shudders and falls, the giant's roar swallowed by the thud of his body hitting the ground. We've all heard some version of this ending. The boy triumphant, the giant dead, the treasure secured. A moral tacked on depending on the telling, pluck and daring rewarded, or justice served against a villain. But here's where it gets strange. The version most of us carry in our heads, golden hen, magic harp, the booming chant comes from printings not much older than the Industrial Revolution, and yet some of its bones may be older than the Bible itself. A 2016 phylogenetic study of folktales suggested the core plot: the boy who climbs to a sky realm and steals treasure from an inhuman guardian might trace back to the Proto-Indo-European Bronze Age between 4,500 and 6,500 years ago. That's older than Homer, older than the earliest chapters of Genesis, which raises the first real question. How did a scrap of Bronze Age myth survive into an English children's story, printed in the 1700s? Imagine the chain of voices, market tellers in medieval fairs, travelers swapping tales on muddy roads, scribes and pamphlet printers catching fragments before they vanished. Along the way, the hero's name hardened into Jack, the everyman of English folktales, from the same root as John, borrowed from French Jacques. The ogre, likely from the Latin orcus, lord of the underworld, kept his hunger for human flesh, even if Victorian editions softened it to bone-grinding bread. And that beanstalk? The word itself, Old English bean plus stalk, carries shadows. In ancient Mediterranean and Roman ritual, beans were linked to death and ancestral spirits, banned in Pythagorean purity laws, scattered in Lemuria rites to ward off the dead. If the story's core really is 5 millennia old, the climb might once have been less about adventure and more about crossing the boundary between worlds. In a moment, we'll leave Jack dangling from his vine and follow the paper trail through 18th-century pamphlets, 19th-century moral makeovers, and the slow tightening of the tail into the shape we know today. But hold that image for now, the boy on the stalk, halfway between earth and sky, carrying with him not just a stolen treasure, but a secret planted thousands of years before he was born. Picture an English winter evening in the early 1700s. A wattle and daub cottage wall rattles faintly in the wind. Inside, the fire burns low, the smell of tallow smoke and oatcakes drifting through the room. Around the hearth, neighbors lean close, not just for warmth, but for the story. The voice that carries it is practiced. A boy, a cow, a bargain gone wrong, and a climb to a world above the clouds. For centuries, this was how Jack and the Beanstalk lived, passed from mouth to mouth, without an author's name or a fixed shape. Then, in London in 1734, it finally left the firelight and entered ink. Published in a small volume called Round About Our Coal Fire, the story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean appeared under the imprint of J. Roberts. This is the earliest secure printed version we can name, and it reads like a product of its time, part entertainment, part moral fable, sprinkled with satire for the urban coffeehouse crowd. In that telling, the giant is named Gog Magog, a figure already loaded with mythic resonance from English folklore and pageantry. The tone is brisk, a little knowing, as though the narrator assumes you've heard something like it before, which, of course, many readers had. Oral tradition had already done the heavy lifting. Print merely caught it mid-stride. 73 years later, the tale shifted again. Benjamin Tabart's The History of Jack and the Beanstalk, published in London in 1807, was the first standalone children's book version. And here, the editors grafted on a justification for Jack's theft. A fairy reveals that the giant had murdered Jack's father and stolen his wealth. The magic hen, the harp, these were no longer prizes of chance but rightful restitutions. For a Victorian audience steeped in propriety, theft had to be recast as justice. By the time Joseph Jacobs included Jack and the Beanstalk in English fairy tales in 1890, the pendulum swung back. Jacobs stripped away the fairy and the moralizing, claiming he wanted something closer to oral tradition. His Jack was bolder, less explained, more of a trickster. This became the version reprinted in school readers and anthologies, cementing the beats most of us know: the cow trade, the climb, the chant, the treasures, the fall. But the road between Roberts's 1734 pamphlet and Jacobs's 1890 collection isn't just a straight line. The tale traveled through chapbooks, cheap folded paper booklets sold by hawkers across Britain, and through oral retellings that left no record at all. In the markets of York or the docks of Bristol, a storyteller could condense it to a 2-minute fireside joke or stretch it into a 40-minute saga, adding local landmarks or jokes about neighbors. And beyond Britain, the plot itself, boy steals treasure from an inhuman giant, was already part of a larger migratory family. Folklorists classify it as ATU 328, the boy steals ogre's treasure, with a dedicated subtype, ATU 328A, for the Beanstalk variant. The cataloguing is modern. Hans-Jörg Uther's 2004 revision systematized it, but the narrative bones had been moving across Europe for centuries. Even the chant Fee Fi Fo Fum has its own independent paper trail. Shakespeare drops it into King Lear around 1606, nearly a century and a half before Jack Spriggins. That's a breadcrumb suggesting that certain motifs were circulating long before they were stitched together into the Beanstalk plot. Etymology tells another part of the transmission story. Jack, as a folktale hero, wasn't invented for this tale. It's an everyman name in English tradition, sprouting in dozens of Jack tales from Jack the Giant Killer to Lazy Jack. Ogre came from the French ogre, probably from Latin orcus, god of the underworld, words that carried their own baggage before Jack ever started climbing. And the beanstalk itself? In the Old English compound bean plus stalk, the bean is ordinary enough as a plant, but extraordinary in its symbolic freight. Ancient Mediterranean cultures often linked beans with the dead, whether in the Pythagorean taboo against eating them or the Roman Lemuria ritual scattering them to appease ghosts. This doesn't prove a direct line from ancient rites to Jack's vine, but it leaves a hint that the plant was never just a plant. So by the time the Victorians tucked Jack into juvenile libraries, the tale had already been through 3 centuries of mutation, oral improvisation, chapbook condensation, moral justifications, and literary restorations. It was part of a living network of story exchange, stretching back into the deep past. But here's where it gets strange again. If the printed Jack is barely 3 centuries old, how do we get to that 5,000-year claim? For that, we need to step out of the print shop and into the lab, where computational models, of all things, are tracing folktales back through language families to a time before writing. And if those models are right, the roots of Jack's vine go deeper than anyone imagined. Imagine taking hundreds of stories from dozens of cultures, breaking them down into their smallest moving parts, like bones in an archaeological dig, and then comparing the shapes until a pattern emerges. That's essentially what a 2016 phylogenetic study by Jamshid Tehrani and Sara Grassa da Silva did. Using methods borrowed from evolutionary biology, they tracked how specific tail types traveled along language family trees. One of those tail types was ATU 328, the boy steals ogre's treasure. Within it sits the beanstalk subtype, ATU 328A. But the study wasn't looking for Jack specifically. It was looking for the underlying code. A young protagonist ascends, whether up a vine, into a tree, or by another route into a supernatural realm guarded by a man-eating being, steals one or more treasures, and escapes. In Thompson's Motif Index, it's 54.2, plant grows to sky, Gate4, fee-fi-fo-fum, exclamation, G532, ogre smells human, bone 103.2, 1, treasure-laying bird, and done 1,601.18, self-playing instrument. When those motifs were plotted against Indo-European language phylogenies, the researchers found a deep root, likely dating back to the Proto-Indo-European Bronze Age, between about 4,500 and 6,500 years ago. This is not the age of the printed story. It's the age of the narrative skeleton, which means the beanstalk might be a relatively recent English, sprouting on a much older trunk. Think of it as a vine grafted to an ancient rootstock. The climb to the sky has cousins across the Indo-European world. Norse myths of Asgard's bridge, the Celtic otherworld reached by glass towers. Indo-Iranian legends of heroes who scale the cosmic tree. Even without a literal beanstalk, the vertical ascent to seize power from an inhuman guardian is there. Age math sharpens the contrast. The earliest secure Jack text, 1734, is just shy of 300 years old. Shakespeare's King Lear line, "Fi, fo, fum," is 419 years old. Aesop's goose that laid the golden eggs is about 2,600 years old, but ATU 328's core. That's where the 5,000-year figure comes in plausible at the motif level, though not provable for the English plot. The caution matters. Not every folklorist buys the phylogenetic method's precision. Christine Goldberg, for example, points out that ATU 328 is a messy category. Many analogues don't have a beanstalk at all. The age estimate assumes a stable transmission along language lines, which oral tradition doesn't always respect. War, migration, trade, these shuffle the deck. And yet, the motif's persistence is undeniable. It's not just in Europe. Folktales from Central Asia, the Caucasus, and South Asia share the steal from an ogre giant arc. In some cases, the treasure is a magical bird or an object that produces endless food motifs that map cleanly onto Jack's hen and harp. In folklore terms, these are type scenes. Once you know them, you start to see them everywhere. The ogre sniffing the air for human blood is a stock entrance. The wife who hides the intruder is a familiar inversion of loyalty. The self-playing harp is part of a long line of enchanted musical instruments in myth, from Orpheus's lyre to the talking drum. Even the trade of the cow for beans, what Maria Tatar calls a fool's exchange, has its counterparts in initiation stories, where the loss of a mundane resource unlocks supernatural opportunity. Anthropologists might see in it an echo of coming-of-age trials, risking the family's survival asset for a leap into the unknown. The language of the chant itself has staying power. Fee-fi-fo-fum has no fixed meaning, but its vowel pattern descending and ascending carries a kind of oral drumbeat. It's designed to be memorable, the way certain war cries or children's rhymes are. That makes it a perfect traveler across centuries and tongues. So, in the data, Jack's vine looks less like a one-off miracle and more like a visible segment of a much longer cord, one that may have been coiled through human storytelling for millennia. But if that cord stretches across continents, what do its other ends look like? And how close do they come to the Jack we think we know? To find out, we need to climb sideways out of England, across Europe, and into the high latitudes and far coasts where the same climb, the same theft, and the same escape play out in unfamiliar shapes. Some will drop the beans entirely, others will keep the sky, the giant, and the treasures, but change the boy beyond recognition. And one, high in the Baltic, will turn the beanstalk into a staircase to heaven itself. Start in Estonia, where the winters are long and the forests deep. There, in a variant catalogued as ATU 328C, the boy doesn't climb a beanstalk at all, he ascends into heaven itself. In Up the Beanstalk into Heaven, the sky realm is a house made entirely of edible food, walls of bread, window panes of sugar, floors you can chew through if you're brave enough. It's the same climb to an otherworld, the same encounter with an overpowering inhabitant, but stripped of the English moral frame. No fairy whispering that the treasure was stolen from his father. Just the raw risk of trespassing into a place where you do not belong. Head west to Scandinavia and the Germanic north, and the beanstalk disappears altogether. The bones of the story remain. A boy, an ogre or troll, a theft of something precious. In some Norwegian tellings, the ascent is into a mountain rather than the sky, still an axis mundi of sorts, but turned horizontal. The boy may trick the giant into carrying him, or slip in through a crevasse while the giant sleeps. The treasures are familiar. A bird that lays golden eggs, a mill that grinds out endless flour, a harp that plays itself. The climb becomes a crawl, but the danger feels the same. Southwest to the British Isles, and we meet the close cousin that has confused many a casual reader, Jack the Giant Killer. This is a different cycle entirely, its own ATU classification, but over time it borrowed the fee-fi-fo-fum chant and even some giant names like Blunderbore. In Cornwall, these giant-killing jacks roam the countryside, luring their prey into traps, using wits rather than vines. It's a cross-pollination of motifs, proof that in oral culture, borders are porous. Cross to the Celtic fringe, and you find climbs not into cloud castles, but into glass towers or enchanted forts that pierce the sky. Celtic otherworld journeys often involve vertical or liminal travel, a leap from a cliff into the sea, a bridge of one hair's width, or a tree that reaches above the firmament. Here, too, the guardian is more than human, and the prize is a thing of endless giving. Farther east, into Indo-Iranian tradition, you can still trace the ascent thief-escape sequence. In some Persian folk tales, the hero reaches the sky on the back of a bird, so vast it darkens the sun. only to find a demon who guards a wellspring of wealth. The hero steals a jewel or a vessel that overflows with food. It's not a stalk, but the climb, literal or figurative, is still there. What's striking is how modular the tale is. The route up can be a vine, a mountain, a staircase, a rope, a bird. The guardian can be a giant, an ogre, a troll, a demon. The treasures can change shapes, but they all serve the same narrative function: inexhaustible provision, the hen; unending creation or craft, the harp; and the elevation of the hero's status back home. These parallels suggest that the beanstalk we know is a local English solution to an old narrative problem: how to get the hero from the mortal world to a place where no mortal belongs. In a land of hedgerows and small farms, a plant that grows overnight into the clouds is both wondrous and rooted in the soil of daily life. In rockier, forested, or mountainous regions, the ascent is built from what's at hand, and there are cultural fingerprints in the details. The Estonian sky house made of food reflects a northern preoccupation with winter scarcity. The Norse mountain ascent mirrors a landscape where peaks dominate the horizon. The English bean, with its whiff of ancient funerary taboo, adds a layer of unease to Jack's gamble. When folklorists like Hans-Jörg Uther codify these into ATU numbers and Thompson motif codes, they're building a kind of map. On it, you can see where the pathways run parallel, where they merge, and where they split. That map tells us that Jack's vine is not an isolated miracle. It's one sprout in a forest of climbs and thefts that have been growing for millennia. But if these are all branches of the same tree, what's at the root? To answer that, we have to look not at geography, but at meaning, at the symbols embedded in the tale, and why they might have mattered enough to be carried across continents and centuries. Because a beanstalk is never just a beanstalk, and a giant's castle is never just a house in the clouds. Step back from the plot for a moment and treat it like an artifact. Every object, every exchange, every ascent has been shaped by the hands of generations, worn smooth in some places, sharpened in others. Folklorists and mythographers treat these as symbols, markers of something deeper than entertainment. Start with the beans. On the surface, they're a gamble, a handful of nothing in exchange for the family's only cow. Maria Tatar calls this a fool's exchange, a classic opening for an initiation tale. You give up the security of the known to gain entry into the unknown, but beans carry older weight. In the Pythagorean tradition, eating them was taboo. In Roman Lemuria rituals, beans were scattered to appease the restless dead. That link between beans and the boundary with the underworld shadows Jack's bargain. What he plants isn't just a seed, it's a key to a liminal space. The beanstalk itself is a textbook axis, mundi, a world tree, or ladder, connecting the human realm with the other world. Mircea Eliade wrote about such vertical links in Bronze Age and Indo-European cosmologies: the Norse Yggdrasil, the Vedic cosmic pillar, the shaman's tree. Jack's vine is a folk-scale version of those, sprouting not in a temple but in a farmyard. Its overnight growth compresses the long, arduous journey of initiation into a single magical surge. At the top waits the giant, or ogre. The word ogre in English comes through French, probably from Latin orcus, lord of the underworld. In older readings, the giant is more than a big man. He's a liminal guardian, a being whose hunger for human flesh marks him as belonging to a different order of life. Thompson's motif, G532, ogre smells human, deceived by wife, casts him as a predator, always on the edge of detection. The treasures he guards are not arbitrary. The hen that lays golden eggs is inexhaustible wealth, a close cousin to Aesop's goose, which dates to the 6th century BCE. The self-playing harp is a voice or art that doesn't depend on human effort. Jack's theft of it has been read, in some modern interpretations, as the return of a stolen voice to its rightful owner. Together, the hen and harp chart a progression: provision, then creative power. There's also the chant Fee, Fi, Fo, Fum, which functions like a ritual formula. The descending and ascending vowels give it rhythm. The meaning is less important than the sound. In Shakespeare's King Lear, written in 1606, it appears in the mouth of a madman, disconnected from giants entirely. Its survival into Jack's tale may be less about literal translation and more about its uncanny cadence. The sequence of Jack's visits also has symbolic structure. On the first trip, he steals the hen basic survival. On the second, the harp, art, culture, the means to shape the world. Each theft increases both his resources and the danger of his position. By the third trip, detection is inevitable. The climb down becomes a race against death, ending with the severing of the stalk. Cutting it is more than practical, it's a ritual closure, collapsing the bridge between worlds. Some scholars, like Jack Zipes, read the entire arc through a class conflict lens. In early modern England, enclosure laws were pushing small farmers off common land. Landlords became the giants, hoarding wealth. Jack's theft is an act of reclaiming. The Victorian moral makeover, adding a fairy to justify his actions, domesticated that subversive edge for middle-class children. Other readings lean toward the psychological. The Beanstalk is the adolescent's path out of dependency. The giant, a parental or societal authority to be challenged. The treasures, the assets needed to build an independent life. The repeated climbs mimic the trial and error of growing up. The final severing of the stalk is the clean break from childhood. And the bean as seed, life, death, rebirth, carries us back to agricultural ritual. In many ancient societies, planting a seed was a metaphor for burial and resurrection. Jack's mother throws the beans out in anger. The earth eats them, and they return transformed. That transformation is Jack's rite of passage in plant form. When you lay these readings side by side, agricultural, cosmological, psychological, they interlock. The beanstalk is at once a literal ladder, a symbolic bridge, and a social escalator. The giant is both monster and metaphor. The hen and harp are both loot and life tools. This density of meaning is what lets a story survive. It can mean different things to different audiences, and all of them can be true at once. But dense meaning also attracts reinterpretation, even distortion. And over the centuries, Jack and the Beanstalk has picked up a trail of misconceptions, some harmless, some worth correcting, about where it came from, what it meant, and how old it really is. To follow those, we have to step out of the symbolic and into the battleground of debate. Every famous folktale collects its share of baggage misreadings passed along like heirlooms, guesses mistaken for fact, and claims that sound good on a book jacket but collapse under scrutiny. Jack and the Beanstalk is no exception. The first and loudest misconception is about age. The printed Jack is not 5,000 years old. The earliest secure text we can name, the story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean, comes from London in 1734. That makes the specific English version just under 3 centuries old. The 5,000 figure refers to a much older motif. Ancestry identified in the 2016 phylogenetic study by Sara Grassa da Silva and Jamshid Tehrani. They argued that the underlying tail type, ATU 328, may date back to the Proto-Indo-European Bronze Age. But that's the skeleton, not the flesh, the deep pattern, not the English plot. Some scholars are cautious about that number. Oral traditions don't travel in neat, unbroken lines along language family trees. Wars, migrations, trade routes, and cultural fusions can shuffle motifs unpredictably. Christine Goldberg, for one, points out that many ATU 328 comparanda don't have a beanstalk at all. Lumping them together may inflate the apparent age. A second common mix-up is between Jack and the Beanstalk and Jack the Giant Killer. Both feature a hero named Jack. Both have giants. And over time they've traded phrases, most famously the Fee Fi Fo Fum chant. but they're distinct cycles with different origins and ATU classifications. Confusing them flattens the variety of Jack tales in English tradition. Then there's the golden egg bird. Many modern tellings treat the hen in Jack as a direct descendant of Aesop's goose that laid the golden eggs. While the connection is plausible, the Aesop fable dates to the 6th century BCE. It's not a one-to-one. Borrowing. The golden egg motif exists independently in multiple cultures. It may have merged into Jack through the wider pan-European tale family, not through a conscious lift from Aesop. Victorian moral editing adds another wrinkle. Benjamin Tabart's 1807 version grafts on a fairy who explains that the giant had murdered Jack's father and stolen his wealth. That's not in the earliest print or oral echoes. It's a sanitizing move to make the theft palatable to middle-class parents. Later children's editions went further, toning down or excising the giant's cannibalism, replacing it with the euphemism bone-grinding bread. If you grew up thinking the giant was more bluster than threat, that's the Bowdlerized legacy at work. Even the Beanstalk's supposed Englishness is complicated. While the vine and sky imagery is distinctive, cross-cultural parallels from Estonian sky houses to Persian climbs on the backs of great birds show that England's version is a local expression of a global template. Insisting it's purely English erases the centuries of cross-pollination that gave it form. There's also the temptation to read the story as an encoded historical event, say, a peasant revolt or a specific theft from a landlord. Jack Zipes's class conflict interpretation, linking the giant to early modern English land enclosures, is compelling as metaphor but shouldn't be mistaken for a documented origin. The tale works because it's flexible. The giant can stand for whatever oppressive force the audience recognizes. That adaptability is a strength, not proof of a single hidden history. Finally, the chant. Because Shakespeare uses fi, fo, fum in King Lear circa 1606, some assume Jack and the Beanstalk was already circulating in that form. But there's no evidence the plot we know existed then. More likely, the chant was a floating bit of oral nonsense, verse memorable sound divorced from any fixed narrative until later storytellers attached it to the giant. So, what do we keep and what do we discard? We keep the documented print history. Roberts in 1734, Tabart in 1807, Jacobs in 1890. We keep the ATU classification and the motif codes, which anchor the tale in a comparative framework. We keep the caution that the 5,000-year claim is about deep roots, not the flower we see, and we discard the easy conflations, the overconfident proofs, and the idea that one culture owns a story whose DNA crosses continents. Knowing the limits of what we can prove doesn't make the story smaller, it makes it sharper. It clears the fog so we can see exactly what's remarkable, that a plotline forged in prehistory can survive every retelling, every translation, every moral adjustment, and still grip us today. Which leads to the real question, the one that will take us to the end of this climb. Why? Why this boy? This vine? This giant? Why does Jack and the Beanstalk endure when thousands of other folktales have withered? To answer that, we have to return to the human stakes, to what happens when the climb is done and the ground waits below. The Beanstalk is gone now, severed, toppled, left to rot in the field. The giant lies broken somewhere in the space between myth and memory. Jack stands in his yard, treasures at his feet, a hen that will never stop giving, a harp that sings without a hand to touch it. The wind that once whipped through the stalk's leaves is just a breeze again, and yet the climb is far from over. Every time Jack and the Beanstalk is told, it plants itself anew in someone's mind. Part of its staying power lies in its simplicity. A poor boy, a reckless trade, an impossible ascent, a life or death escape. It's the pure distillation of risk and reward, danger and cunning. Those beats work in a medieval hall, in a Victorian nursery, on a Disney reel in 1947, or in a modern blockbuster like Jack the Giant Slayer in 2013. Psychologically, it's an adolescent story. Jack starts powerless, no wealth, no say in his future, and ends with the resources to control his own fate. The climb is the break from dependency. The giant, a stand-in for any overpowering authority. The thefts, moments of claiming agency. For children, it's adventure. For adults, it's the memory of the first time you outwitted someone who held all the cards. Culturally, it's endlessly adaptable. In times of scarcity, the hen is hope. In times of repression, the giant is tyranny. In times of rapid change, the beanstalk is opportunity, risky, thrilling, maybe fatal, but there to be climbed. Jack Zipes' reading of the giant as a land-grabbing overlord works in an England of enclosures. In another era, the same giant might be a foreign invader, a corrupt official, or a faceless corporation. And the imagery, that's what makes it cinematic. The overnight vine erupting into the clouds, the dizzying climb past circling birds, the vast hall with rafters blackened by centuries of smoke, the smell of roasting ox in the air, iron keys clanking at the giantess's belt, the harp's strings humming like a voice trapped in wood. These are images you can see, smell, and hear. Without effort, they root themselves in memory. The tale also thrives because it's modular. Swap the vine for a mountain or a rope, the giant for a demon or dragon, the treasures for a magic mill or wishing stone. It's still recognizably the same climb and theft story. That adaptability is what allowed the ATU 328 motif to survive for perhaps 5 millennia, shifting to fit the landscapes and fears of each culture it touched. Even Bowdlerization couldn't kill it. Victorian editors softened the gore, justified the theft, painted Jack as morally pure, but the core remained. In Into the Woods, 1986, Sondheim and Lapine put the fallout front and center, showing what happens when you take from someone who isn't done with you. In Mickey and the Beanstalk, 1947, the giant is comical, but the beanstalk's wonder still holds. Every retelling, even the light-hearted ones, points back to that first, terrifying climb. There's a deeper current, too. Myths and folktales that endure often encode a universal human tension, the pull between safety and growth. The beanstalk is unsafe, it's alien, fragile, exposed, but it's the only way up. Staying on the ground means starving with the cow gone. Climbing means risking everything. That choice is as old as humanity, and it's why Bronze Age herders, medieval peasants, and 21st century viewers can all recognize themselves in Jack's first foothold on the vine. And maybe that's the 5,000-year-old secret, not a single unchanged story whispered down the centuries, but a blueprint for a certain kind of courage, the audacity to leave the known world, confront something bigger and hungrier than you, and come back changed. Which leaves one last image, the bare patch of earth where the vine once stood. The ground looks ordinary again, but the sky above feels closer somehow. Jack knows what was up there, and so do we. That's why the vine still grows, not in the soil, but in the telling. If you've followed Jack this far, there's another ancient climb worth taking, one with its own bargains, impossible feats, and names that hide more than they reveal. In the next story, we'll pull at the 4,000-year-old thread behind Rumpelstiltskin and ask, what was he really?